Hello, this is Dean Radin, and I'm on Your Superior Self.
Hi, I'm Anita Murjani, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hello, this is Dr. Raymond Moody, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, Cultural Creatives. I'm Bruce Lipton, and I'm here to join you with Your Superior Self.
This is Paul Selig, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Your Superior Self. Tonight, I have one of my most special guests, a return guest. It's not very often I have a return guest like this one. Marla Frees, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Trey. I'm really glad to be here.
So you sent me, I sent you an Instagram post. I went into my history. It was like an anniversary of like a year or 2 year post or something on Instagram. And it was your book. And I had to repost it because it was such a fun interview that we had, right? And you respond back and we start talking back and forth, and you send me this new essay that you've written since, right? The 60-page, I think it is, essay. Who did you send that to? What institute?
Well, that was for the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness. Robert Bigelow had basically put a query out there to the community. He wanted to see the best essays or the best evidence of consciousness surviving death. And I had to write mine, even though I wasn't a PhD, even though I haven't been part of a group for a long time that's been doing research on the afterlife. I still had to write mine. And I loved it. I spent 6 months writing it, and I was not one of the 29 winners, but Jeffrey Mishlove, who has New Thinking Aloud, who happened to win the $550,000 prize, top prize, $550,000 for that particular prize money. And he had me on his show because he really believed that my paper was that special, even though I wasn't a winner. So I get to talk about my paper. Could have used the cash, but that's okay. This way, at least I got to share it with you too. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah.
I really loved it. I enjoyed the part about epigenetics too. And how our environments really kind of create the our perception, or like Bruce Lipton is like one of my favorite scientists. I mean, his work has been transformational in my life, just with the Biology of Belief, that book, and how much that's meant to me. I know you've written, and I'm going to quote here, but the environment, not the genes themselves, determine whether they grow into a bone, skin, or brain cell. Like we always thought it was DNA. We always thought it was our heritage, really. And now we're finding out that it's actually the environment that's like triggering that.
Well, and that's a really big deal. And I think I might have mentioned to you, because you've had Tom Campbell on. Tom and Bruce did a video that's on YouTube, and it's really great, so that anybody who is listening to this can go onto YouTube, just type in Bruce Lipton and Tom Campbell, where they basically discuss their work. And it really was when Bruce started studying the stem cell research. He had been teaching DNA determinism in colleges. So he started doing research on the cellular structure and stem cells. And he realized that on the outside of the cell was this protein that was like liquid crystal. And well, you know what you can do with liquid crystal and in anyway, like, what is it? Silicon Valley. You can type onto the crystal and make an imprint and change the information on the cell. So that's when he did realize that it was the environment. So as a young person, I was going through some things in my home with my parents. So I tried to get out of that house as much as I could, go to the farm that my father had, go to the church, go to school, anything that could get me out of that particular petri dish of abuse that I was suffering with my mom into another way of thinking. And I think that many of us continue to do that.
Yeah. So I'm quoting from your paper. My sensitivities and intuition were birthed from an environment of immediate and impending danger. Do you think a lot of psychics and people with gifts, that's how they're birthed, or how they come to be, is their environment?
Well, I think that all of us are, well, steeped in some sort of milieu of our environment, and how we navigate it or how we utilize it is what really is important. I don't know, Trey. A lot of psychics would say that they had some form of challenge in their home, but I remember talking to Joe McMoneagle, one of the top remote viewers with the government, with the CIA and the remote viewing team. He basically said that he felt it was one of those dynamics where he too had a mother like mine. And he really believed, of course, that being prepared with her opened the door for psychic functioning in a particular way. And he was really inspirational in helping me get my book launched. It was one of those things where I thought, well, if Joe McMoneagle can do it and I can get it out there, then I can too.
American Psychic.
Yeah.
That book is phenomenal. I just reread it the other day. I think the part where at the very beginning where you're riding the horse, right? And you have that intuitive voice, right? Warning you.
And that was the first time I'd ever heard it. So here I am, 14 years old, and there had been a series of events down where we had this farm. My father was a feed salesman, and he had this large hog farm, and we had horses together. So I hadn't been down there in almost a year. There had been 3 murders back to back down in that area, and one of the girls was my classmate. So for me to go down there and start to be with my horse and ride by myself, my dad said, "Do you want me to go with you?" And I said, "No, I want to try it by myself." So I rode up through the hills and down through the Gameland Road to the actual road going back to the farm. And it was a beautiful day. It was a May day, and there was, it looked like there was some sort of rain coming. I didn't know it was going to be a storm, but the storm hit and my horse took off. Now, what you do with a runaway horse is you spin it to the side. But my horse, her hackamore had been loosened for some reason. So I could not control her. I could not spin her because there was a embankment with a barbed wire fence on the right side. And on the left were semi-trucks, and it was raining. And I thought to myself, I know I can handle this. I know what will happen. If I get into the barn, she'll stop, she'll dig her heels in, and I'll fly forward. And I knew that there was a whole pile of shavings there that I could fly into. But I heard, "No, there's no shavings. Dig your heels into the stirrups. Hold on." And I thought, what was that? Who was that? Was that Jesus come to save me? I had no idea what it was, but that's exactly what happened. I hung on, and the horse did dig her heels in. I was screaming. People were running to me. And as the horse dug her heels in, I looked. There were no shavings. Someone had taken them all between the time that I had left the barn and put them into the pens. And my right foot in my cowboy boot saved me. I flew forward, and that boot had me spin around, and I fell back to my keister. I hit my ass, and then my head hit the back of the concrete. And yeah, I was shaken and stirred at that moment like I'd never been. And you know what, Trey, what's interesting about that is it's not just the voice that came to me to start to massage me into listening, but it was literally the frequency of hitting the base of my spine and my head shook me into a space where I stopped being fearful. I started to control my life. I wasn't fearful of the man who had murdered my girlfriend from down in the valley. I wasn't fearful of the man who'd come in and killed 2 women that were down in the valley that were serving lunches to people. I stopped being fearful, and I started getting curious at that age.
And In Pennsylvania, 3 murders. I feel like that's a high. All right. Like, I mean,
Well,
I feel like
it's a small town, South Central Pennsylvania. They had never had 3 murders, especially back in 1970, 71.
was it the same guy?
No.
Hmm.
It wasn't.
At what point in your career did you start working with law enforcement, right? Like, did those murders have a large influence on that decision?
Well, it had a large influence on me because, as I said, getting like shocked like that, I had a terrible concussion, and that dynamic, I couldn't remember, you know, I was a twirler at the time, and I was getting ready to go back to school, and I couldn't type right, and I didn't have short-term memory recall. It was really hard. I had to really reset myself. But when I started working as a psychic, and that wasn't until the mid 90s, it was because of those murders that I was like, I can handle this. I thought about those murders for years, every single gory part of it all. And so when I started working with remote viewers and law enforcement, I didn't have fear. I just had the desire to tell the story that I was hearing or seeing.
It's so interesting. Remote viewing. Tom Campbell teaches that, right? Like, I think he does classes on remote viewing. What would he say about the voice that you heard on that horse?
Well, first off, I want to tell your listeners and viewers that Tom really changed the way that I approached my work when I first met him 12 years ago. He has a scientific way of explaining the paranormal. He makes the paranormal normal by basically talking about this work as it's an information system. So we're retrieving information from the database, and we don't want to think of our deceased loved ones in a database, but the LCS, which Tom calls the larger consciousness system, really does give us something so incredibly benevolent about giving us the opportunity to access these things. So if we need them, when we need them, that LCS delivers. So I've been looking at my life in a completely different way since working with Tom, because that LCS, most people would call God, has been working with me constantly. And he would say, well, Marla, doing my imitation of Tom, well, Marla, you know, you really wanted some help. You kept reaching out saying, help me. You know, I'd been praying, I'd been asking for aliens to abduct me. I've been doing anything I possibly could to get some support. So I guess that LCS, that larger consciousness system, pays attention. So that voice that came to me, Tom said, basically, the LCS will deliver what we need. Like, some people see ghosts. Some people see their dead relatives at the base of their bed in the middle of the night. They have dreams. Sometimes they will have an experience very much like my accident, where they are warned. Or in near-death experiences, people are pulled out of their body and they're watching themselves. So all of those experiences, Trey, are opportunities for more growth in consciousness. And I love my work more than I've ever loved it. I'm so invested in helping people understand this work. And as you said, Tom's teaching these things. He literally started teaching a number of years ago. Well, I guess he decided, because of his work with Monroe, all of that, he was doing accessing past lives, accessing deceased loved ones, accessing altered states of consciousness and aliens and entities and all of that. So, as well as the remote viewing. So his teaching has been online and in person, but after the pandemic, it's only been online. Sure. And I've had the most incredible experiences with his binaural beats. So I think you could go on to MBT events and find out, you know, what they're
like $30. They're fairly cheap. And there's like a whole MP3 file of binaural beats. I love them. I use them all the time.
Good. Well, they're Cadillac. They're Cadillac. They don't have any guidance, so they're just binaural beats. So, yeah.
Well, do you like that more? Like with no guidance, do you feel like you're allowed to kind of free range a little bit with your consciousness?
You bet. People ask me, well, do you do a meditation? Do you do this? You know, when I start to work, I look at my schedule and I try not to think about the person. I look at the person's name. I just write down the first name and I know I'm going to call them. But I try not to go there yet, because as soon as I go there, a flood of information will come in. And I want to be able to do that at least maybe 30 minutes before I start working. I don't want to think about them at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it happens. And I'm like, I've got my little yellow pad and I'm writing down details. And it's one of those things that it's just amazing. And I really think that everybody can do this.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I feel like everyone can. We don't get in those altered states of consciousness enough to where we can we don't have the, what is it, the we're too much in our left brain, right? Like we're too much in our left brain, not enough in our right. We don't, the hemisync synchronizes the brain into, you know, into those altered states of consciousness where we can experience phenomena that we normally wouldn't in a waking state, or what is it, beta state, right? I know for me,
Beta, gamma,
gamma, theta, delta, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Tom's binaural beats for me, it's like the Lamborghini of binaural beats. Like
I know.
It's crazy.
I know. I would say Cadillac, but you probably know cars more than I do. So you go to the Lamborghini. I agree with you. And
it's like 0 to 60 in like 1 second. Like you put him on, like he gears you up. He has like a little something in the front, and then next thing you know, it's like you're having these visions, and your consciousness is somewhere else. I know you've done out of body work too, and I think you've spoken about one out of body experience where you had your consciousness leave your body.
Yeah.
Where did you go after you left your body?
Well, I think the thing about leaving my body as a child to avoid the trauma is different than leaving our consciousness leaving the body when we're older and we're working in this realm. There's a terminology in psychology called disassociation or splitting. And many of us who were, I guess we could just talk about it, abuse. We could find the perpetrator coming toward us and all of a sudden find ourselves watching the perpetrator and us. So we would leave our bodies to watch what was happening. Or when I was being abused, I would leave my body and I go up through the ceiling out into the neighborhood, looking in the amber lights of where I could possibly go in someone's house. And that was the precursor to bilocating as a psychic. And anybody that's done remote viewing can basically send their consciousness to someplace and begin to see and identify elements at the target.
So your consciousness is leaving the body. It's not you using your imagination, like remote viewing.
Well, I think the imagination, I'm glad you brought that up, because Tom's new book called Tom's Park is what he wrote about having the imagination. He created a park and he basically tells you how to go through it. And it's for the left brain people, Trey, who don't really have or trust their own imagination. It gives people a bridge, so to speak, of going to a park and seeing things. And you might see you or me in the park just because we've been going there. And this is part of giving people an opportunity to grow that link between, is it real? Is it not real? And, I've been doing this for so long that I have to trust everything that I get. But it's the dead. And, that paper that I wrote, it was in England with Tom doing one of his immersives. And I was there helping, but I also went back to my room and did the exercises. And one of those exercises, I wanted to meet some deceased loved ones that I didn't know, and that they could tell me a little bit about why my mother was so troubled. And I met my grandmother and my grandfather. And that particular experience was so real, so deep, so clear, so visceral that it's become another part of my work where it's really about generational healing. Why else go into the database or the information to connect to our deceased loved ones if we're not going to learn something? And Tom would say that if it is helpful for both people, then sometimes those people, the deceased loved ones, wait for us to come, or they could come to us so that we could hear something that would help us move forward. And that's exactly what my work is about now.
Mm.
It's generational healing.
Mm. I love that. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, but first I have to ask you, were you more excited about landing Seinfeld or having data, collected evidence that you're communicating with a deceased loved one?
Oh, that's so fun. Thanks for asking that. I was really fortunate to have quite a wonderful career as an actress, without being too public and too well known, so to speak. But I left the business in 2002. I was on stage. I did a lot of television, did a lot of commercials, as well as episodics and comedies, but sitcoms. But when this work started in the mid-90s, there was nothing more important than doing this work. Of course, my bank account changed, but I'm just so grateful to be able to do the work.
I don't know how you can afford LA. I was out there in August and looking at some of the rent prices. I'm like, geez, this place is.
Well, I don't know how much longer I'll be able to afford it, but I'll.
Where would you go? Where would you go if you had to move?
You know what, Trey? That is a very interesting question. I
see you in Arizona.
Too hot. I need hills. I don't want flats. I've been in enough.
So
flats.
Northwest, maybe.
Well,
like Northwest.
Well, I'm spoiled by California, so I don't know. California is so amazing. Maybe I would just go to another part of California that's not as expensive as LA.
Sure. In your paper, right? You have some amazing stories, a lot of personal stories, personal accounts of your, very personal accounts with a stalker that kind of tapped you back into that intuitive knowing. Hit on that a little bit, because it was very interesting how you were given a gift from him, this person, and you started hearing a voice that was telling you, basically this is not your gift. Well,
that's the first time I really ever knew that I was hearing from a dead person. It had just happened at the same time. Jerry Rubin, the activist, do you remember who Jerry Rubin was? Yeah, Jerry Rubin with Abby Hoffman. He was a friend of mine, and he had launched the Green Movement. So he was very interested in environmental studies. And I had met he and his girlfriend at a big convention, and we were planning Thanksgiving together. And he crossed Wilshire Boulevard and was hit by a car. And when we were all going to the hospital to see him, no one is prepared to see somebody that has been, dissected from the groin all the way up to the neck and with a traction device on his head. And I walked in and we were all paralyzed. We didn't know what to do. And I went back into the waiting area and I started praying, and I heard, "Marla, I'm not coming back." And I thought, he's not talking to me. Who he would talk to somebody else. So I just blew that off. But within a week or two, this stalker person that I didn't know it at the time was a stalker until later, basically was trying to ingratiate himself to me. And in that, he tried to give me a pair of gloves. And I tried the gloves on and I thought, no, that doesn't make me feel very good. They're beautiful. But my stomach turned over. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't take these." And I heard, "They're not yours to wear." I was like, oh my God, what is that? And so I started listening to this voice who was talking to me as this person was walking away, and she was warning me about him and told me to go to where he said he was trying to live in this house and buy it. Well, it was a whole sham. It was a whole ruse. And she guided me through this to find out that this guy was a con artist who I ended up going to law enforcement about. But it was her voice that made me pay attention. This woman by the name of Evie Greenberg is somebody that basically saved my life. And that was the first dead person I had ever heard. And then I had to pay attention. I thought it was crazy. I thought it was crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you were going through a lot, right? Like a stalker, and then talking to a dead person, and then, confirming both of those. Like that must have been an insane period of your, time of your life.
Well, it was. Yeah.
Working with the law enforcement on cold cases, right? Was that important to you because of the validity of that, or the credibility of working with law enforcement? Like, could you have done that in any other capacity, you think, and still felt, I guess, confident in your work?
Well, I think that when it started happening, because it was a stalking situation, and I had to work with a threat management unit, and I had to put this guy away. I mean, it became a very interesting dynamic. But I had to go to law enforcement to get help, and in turn, I started helping them, which was really weird. All of a sudden, this awareness that I started to have, because I was in fear, it opened up this psychic part of my brain, and the antennas never went back down. But it's interesting, Trey, this last year was there was a culmination to my first case that I ever worked. It was the first time I ever went into the field, and it was the San Luis Obispo case of Kristen Smart, the missing Cal Poly student. And this is after I had moved from the stalker. I had gone to another part of town, and I really thought, I really need some help with this. And it was right when I started working with the remote viewing people I was training, that I was given an envelope, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't open it, but I saw, basically from the perspective of a drone. This was back in 96, 97. And I saw a campus, I saw 4 people, 2 people go this way. And basically the whole scenario played out where this woman with blonde hair was with this guy who was trying to be romantic with her. And he took her into his dorm room. And I basically watched him try to have relations with her, strangle her, choke her somehow. And then I saw him go out in the hall, call his father, and his father came with the truck to pick up the body. And then it was over. And this last year, just a few months ago, it's taken 26 years. Paul Flores was basically found guilty of first-degree murder of Kristen Smart without the body. And this was the young man, and I believe his father was involved too, but he was not charged with anything. But it's been an ongoing case. To have that come to fruition with my first case, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just told the sheriff and who I was working with, a PI person, what I had seen. It wasn't a long story. And, the PI has, been interviewed about this and has mentioned me. And they said, well, what about Marla's work? And she said, well, she didn't find me a body. So we never, but to go through something like that, can you only imagine what this family has been through for 26 years? And that just seeing this, even though I saw it, they're not going to bring me in and put me on the stand. They can't do that with a psychic. The only thing that we can do is try to influence law enforcement the best we possibly can. So that was my first case. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I have to pay attention to this. and one case after another. And, I don't even know sometimes what happens on those cases because I just give the information. It's up to them to do something about it. I
Sure.
know that my work has been helpful, but like with that Kristen Smart case, I mean, my God, 26 years.
That's a long time. What do you feel in your body, right? Do you feel anything in your body when you're, when
Sure.
you go into those scenes?
Yeah, I remember the first time after that particular case, I was working with a behavioral science guy, a doctor of behavioral science from the Los Angeles Police Department. And, they would bring me in on the sly, and I don't basically talk about who they are because, we don't want them to have any connection to that psychic dynamic. But I went into his office and he basically handed me a paper of one of the victims or talking about the victim. And I never read it. But what I did is I went straight to the laundromat, apparently where this happened. So my mind bilocated to the laundromat. And then I started choking. My throat started closing up. I started gagging. And apparently that was part of how she was assaulted because it was the perpetrator was shoving something down her throat. So yes, I was experiencing that. And I think that that's part of what someone like me who has this sort of Geiger counter sensibility will feel. But we have to be careful, Trey. You just don't want that happening all the time to your body. So you have to be distant from it. You have to try and get the dead person to basically stay out of my body, just give me the information. But sometimes those physical aspects are really, really helpful for an investigation. It corroborates things.
That's so interesting because you talked about near-death experiences and how when consciousness leaves the body, it's very objective, right? When you're viewing that scene or that experience, right? But you experience past loved ones. Do you experience their personality too? Because
Yes.
I'm trying to think of all right, what's the connection here? And I know Tom Campbell talks about how we, as consciousness, we go and we experience, we explore, we evolve, we keep continuing on. And he says that the consciousness that is the past loved one is just like an imprint or the larger consciousness system playing that role as Uncle Tom or whomever your past loved one is, right? So kind of touch on that a little bit because
Yeah, I love talking with Tom about this. And, we go at it. We don't butt heads. We just go at it. He has a vast experience around how he has found his model of this being a simulation or what's the other terminology?
virtual reality.
Thank you, virtual reality. But yeah, it's one of those, it's the dynamic of it being an information system. Excuse me. So he basically understands that Uncle Fred, once consciousness leaves the body is of course dead. And it's my experience of that experience, because I've talked to a lot of these people, is that when the consciousness leaves the body, all the issues are left in the tissues. So you're leaving the body going, oh my God, I feel like a whole different person because I don't have all of the pathology of growing up, being hurt, being abused, having my own, insecurities. And I have experienced that numerous times with people who have left their body. I can feel what they feel. I've even had dreams of not being Marla, leaving my own body. And I'm like, whoa, I'm so hot. Look at this hair. It's amazing. It's really dynamic. But Tom and I talk about the need for the free will awareness unit, which most people would basically call a soul. So when Marla dies, Marla's consciousness moves on, gets ready to move on. And part of who Marla was goes into this is part of this free will awareness unit, part of the whole LCS thing. Basically, it's no longer Marla, but Marla in spirit might need to learn something that she experienced with one of her family members. And Marla might want to talk to one of her living family members to help them, because it would be good for Marla to learn that, and also the living family member. So that's part of why these things happen. When you talk about the personality, that's what's so amazing about this LCS terminology that Tom uses. the larger consciousness system facilitates something about pulling that information out of the database. And it's not just like a file of facts, it's the person. You feel the personality. You see, I'm taken to their homes, the places of business, where they last saw the benevolence of the loved one, conversations that they had, plus the enormous, just the emotional love. You know why I do this? It's because of the love. I get to feel all the love.
Mm.
So yes, Tom says it's as real as it can possibly be. So that love never dies. That consciousness, that information we can access. And for me, it's not as sciencey as just, Uncle Tom being in a database. Not at all. It's so rich. It's so real. It's a thin slice moment of life that I feel so privileged to be able to share. And it's important to have the living make that bridge between what they need to learn from that person who's dead and can see what's going on, knows what's going on in your life, and has grown because of it. So consciousness continues to grow on some level, which I find fascinating. And Tom believes it doesn't happen all the time, but I talk to dead people a lot. So it's my experience that is what's going on.
It's so weird because like you're using your methods, your modalities as a tool to tap into the larger consciousness system. The larger consciousness system is using you as a tool to communicate with people who are not aware that life exists after death. Isn't it? It's like a two-way street.
Yeah. I'm a tool.
You're a tool. You're a tool using a tool to talk to the larger consciousness system, and vice versa.
I think that's what's kind of crazy about it, because remember, if from my book, you remember in my memoir, I talked about how skeptical I was. And even in this paper, I was so skeptical. I didn't believe this. I had a snarky, skeptical attitude.
Not you. Not you.
Yeah, exactly. Not me. You. Like my ego knew more than it did. A lot of people act like that, but I was shocked. I could not believe.
Well, let me stop you right there, right?
Sure.
So just for people listening and just heard that side of you, Marla Frees, right? Like this analytical, skeptical personality type, right? And to where you are now, what's the message? What has changed?
It's all about love.
Hmm. What about the messages from deceased loved ones? How have they changed over the years?
Well,
or is it the same?
No, it's not always the same. I'll give you an example of what happened yesterday. I don't, when I'm working, I don't know who these people are. They send me a note and say I was recommended by so-and-so. And I work a little bit before I get on the phone with them, and I can usually get the gestalt of what's going on with them. But this is also talking about being in the body. For about an hour before I got on the phone with this woman, I was in pain. I was walking around like, is it the cold? Is it the rain that's making me feel like this? And then I started hearing, I got Nikki, my dog Nikki was with me, and blah, 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 blah. And talk about this because she'll remember how messy my house was, and talk about the fact that I heard her. And I could feel this man who really needed to be heard. And I get her on the phone and I said, listen, I'm not sure what you wanted to talk about right away, but I've got to tell you, I've got a man who's talking about Nikki. She said, and I think the dog was named like Picky or something. It was a different name, but it sounded like Nikki. But she says, I don't know who this is. And she said, I really wasn't prepared for this. And I said, that's the point. I send you a note that basically said, please intention information for your highest good. So he came in to apologize to her. He had abused her. And he showed me from the time he said that she was so precious. And at the age of 3, all the way up until 14, he had been so abusive. Well, he had been abusive. And we went down that road, and it was not something that she necessarily wanted to hear, but it was what she needed. And here's this guy that's been dead for, I don't know, I think he's been dead for maybe 15, 16 years, acknowledging that he had hurt her, wanting to apologize about this.
Do you think we carry trauma over into the past life, or not past life, but into when we leave these bodies? Do you think we carry trauma with us?
I think that as soon as our consciousness leaves the body, we're not feeling it, but we have the memory of it. It is in that database that we talk about. You know, it's like this thin slice moment, which is filled with all of the wonders of emotion and information and details and whatever is necessary to share with a person that needs to continue to feel the love. Because I wouldn't be doing this work if I thought it was a sham. I wouldn't be doing this work at all if I didn't think that it had some sort of merit. So the trauma is the memory of it. But I think that it stays in the body. That's what I'm experiencing with these deceased loved ones. Sometimes people still have a pathology moment where they will be speaking just so that the person that I'm talking to understands that, yep, that's them. They had that sort of neurotic personality disorder. Or sometimes the deceased person will say, I'm not that way anymore.
You know, it's weird. You were talking about that, and I literally saw an orb fly in front of the screen.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Who was that?
I don't know. I don't know. I was on a Zoom the other day and I saw something come from behind here and go out the door. And then look, my chair did this. It has a lever on it. It did this. My chair had been pushed and I lost my height in the chair. You have to mess with this. You have to mess.
You were totally cut out of the shot. How often does that kind of stuff happen?
It doesn't. I don't know. You know, when I was even talking with people talking about physical mediumship, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really like that stuff where they crawl in your body and they physicalize themselves in the room, and then all of a sudden we see that orb going through.
I literally saw an orb. I was like, did she see that? Because that's the first time in an interview on the show I've seen something like that. I'm like, Marla is just attracting all of this goodness from the larger consciousness system. And
well, you need to see that. You need to see that, and whoever watches this needs to see it too.
See, you're being used as a tool for my development.
Marla, the tool.
In the best possible way. I mean,
Thanks,
best
Trey.
possible way.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That's fun.
I did want to hit on some more about your paper, right? Like there's a part in there about the best of Chris with the blue rock or something like that. The blockbuster, the overdue blockbuster bill. You have to talk about that.
Okay, Chris Dane Owens is Gary Owens' son, and Gary Owens from Laugh-In has passed. But this started in 2001 when I first met him, and I was going to someone's house doing groups, and Chris came to one of the groups, and his deceased wife came through. Lots of details. It was pretty amazing. But before she moved on, and before I had to work with somebody else, she said to me, "Oh, he's going to get a surprise in the mail." And I said, "Have you gotten anything in the mail that you thought was kind of surprising or shocking?" He goes, "No." And then I started to feel her laughing. And I said, "Well, I think she's going to be sending you something in the mail." And like 2 weeks later, he contacts me and says, "Marla, I got a notice from Blockbuster." Remember when Blockbuster was Blockbuster? "I got a notice from Blockbuster. And it was from my wife, Nancy. It was from her account. And now she's been dead. I think that she'd been dead for 8 months. And it came and it said, 'Rock Chris, the best of Chris.'" Well, of course, it was probably Chris Rock's experience, but Chris said, "I know exactly what that meant." It was a message. She got this thing sent to him. They had been in a rock band together. And he had not picked up a guitar, since she had died. And it was her basically saying, or the LCS basically saying, "Get back to your music. This is what we love. This is what we did." And that was part of the missive that night. That was really quite amazing. And then a couple of weeks later, he came to see me privately. And what was interesting about Chris coming to my home up in the hills when I had a house and I was married up in the hills, he walked into the room and there was just a lot of white light. It was as though there was this higher consciousness that wanted to give him information. And we sat down and it was a whole spew of things that I don't remember, but Chris could tell you sometime. But it was about Chris really moving forward with this music. And then I heard, it's about the blue stone. The blue stone has all the information in it. I'm like, do you know anything about a blue stone? He said, no. So, we just wrapped up and it was a really great talk, but he went to his business partner's house the next day and he basically said, the blue stone? And he's digging around in his pockets and he says, oh my God, these two stones showed up on my desk yesterday, Chris. And I thought one of them was for you. And what these stones were like marbles that had been cut in half, and they had these amazing swirls in them. And Chris took it, and he basically, for the next 4 years, or I think it was 4 years, wrote all these songs, did all of this, made an album called The Blue Stone. There was a video that called Shine, which was, and he was featured in Rolling Stone, and he got the best video of the year. And just this year, his movie based on all of that, years later, called Empire Queen, is being released someplace, sometime, but it's an ongoing conversation. So that blue stone showed up like a day or two later.
So they can manipulate this reality, this virtual reality. They have some type of influence.
I mean, let's just look at it from that perspective. How in the world, something so magical like that would be divined? That's fascinating. The message through Blockbuster. I mean, you can only imagine when he called Blockbuster and said, I don't know what this message is here, but my wife's been dead for 8 months and you sent me this. So she'd never check that video out. He'd never seen those blue stones. And so this kind of conversation threatens people because it makes people go, oh, Marla's crazy and Chris is crazy. And oh, did you see that? Did you see that orb that just went by?
You got a party going on over there. Like you got a house full of orbs.
What is that?
It's a high energy conversation. People want to be a part of it. What can I say?
Yeah, I know.
They want to be on the show.
I know. Anyway, so yeah, it's I lost my train of thought. It was moving that way. Oh my God, I'm starting.
Whoever it is, what's going on? How are you? Welcome to the show. Just make yourself known. We can have an interview, set it up, whatever you got to do. Just speak through Marla. She'll be the tool.
Yeah, the tool. This show's called Marla, Trey, Marla, and Marla, the tool. Hey, we're both tools in our own way, aren't
That's
we?
right. Absolutely. But the picture that you used in your paper, here's what I find so interesting is that the blue stone photograph was taken on May 10th, which is my birthday. Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
Oh, interesting.
It's funny how.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. It's funny how these coincidences just pop up. Does any of these entities or past loved ones, like, do they speak to you in reference to your purpose here?
Oh my God, the lessons. Oh, excuse me. Oh, the lessons. I am certainly not put aside and kept in a little bottle, like I'm not going to feel the important things that I have to go through. I am constantly going through lessons. And this last year was like, oh my God. I'm going to tell you about being at the Monroe Institute. I was there at the end of May, beginning of June, for the first UAP experience, unidentified aerial phenomenon. And I was invited to go there. So it was a group of us people that had been in the UAP world and people who had been calling in these energies. And your listeners will be fascinated by the video that was filmed. Rob Freeman, who happens to be from Canada, came with his equipment and was filming the night sky. And he caught what they have up on YouTube on Rob Freeman's YouTube channel. It's called the Monroe Flasher. And it's not a guy in a trench coat. This is actually an experience that we had because we were out there under the stars for 4 clear nights in anti-gravity chairs, looking up, and we can identify that it's I mean, these guys that knew what they were doing as far as looking up there could identify what was a satellite and what was not. They had all of that information. But this Monroe Flasher thing happened when a couple of men started having an argument. And, their egos got involved. And this is really kind of an interesting experience. Here, an ego dynamic was going on between a couple of people that were invited to this experience. We're out under the stars, and it's getting cool, even though it's beginning of June, and we're all wrapped up and everything. And some of us just decided to go inside. Well, when that confrontation wasn't a big confrontation, but when it stopped and these men hugged is when this flashing thing started that was out in Vega. That's how far away it was. So that video is really quite amazing. It flashed for, I think, 40 some minutes. And we took that as a real sign for that dynamic of consciousness. We have been calling those in. And we thought that that was a very interesting wrap up for the evening of ego, moving out of ego into love, into, as Tom Campbell would say, growing in lowering one's entropy for heart-centered work, which is basically consciousness growing, consciousness learning, consciousness loving, consciousness moving forward with, that lower entropy, which is so important.
Sure. I love everything about the Monroe Institute, right? Like I have their app, listen to that. Yeah, listen to that. And I have conversations with Mr. Monroe himself in some of these.
Bob? Yeah, yes. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I was able to get a hold of Bob a couple of times, in the work that I've been doing. Yeah, he shows up. And I think that that's another one of those, I don't know, it's not an orb that's in my eye. It's one of those dynamics of the LCS that continues to give that information, which is so necessary for people.
Sure. Yeah. Tom Campbell's work has been very inspiring for me because it's like he's the one that's helping me walk through these little exercises that I can do at home and like interact with the larger consciousness system and like have little my own proof, right? Like my own data that suggests that the larger consciousness system is interactive and we can interact with that and grow that relationship. That was a huge thing for me, right? Like just being from a religion that you have to be perfect and you have to be a certain way and to get into heaven, right? Like to have an interactive larger consciousness system where you can have a two-way conversation and know that it loves you unconditionally, right. And you can grow that relationship. Like that was huge for me.
Yeah. No ideology, no dogma, thinking of it as a system. And I don't want to reduce it to, a computer like in a phone, but I really like this analogy. When you play solitaire on your phone, you get all these cards and you move them around and then you might get stuck. Well, what happens is there's a little button that jumps up and down for you to click on the hint. And I think that that's kind of how we are working with this system, where we are asking, we're in the game, we're playing. And if we get stuck, we basically go, okay, show me what I need to know. I've been doing this for years now. I go to bed at night saying, show me what I need to heal. And if I don't remember it in the morning, it doesn't matter because I wake up and I'm like, I feel great. I must have handled something. But that dynamic is so tremendous, Trey. I'm so glad you have that awareness where you just are basically asking, so show me this, show me that, give me awareness about this, please. And I used to like to use the word please also, but the dynamic of being able to have this at our fingertips. And like with solitaire, if you get stuck, game over, you have to reshuffle. That just happens. So we go through these things, and the dynamic with what Tom has been teaching, you know what? Let's get him on your show again to talk about Tom's Park.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think that would be really wonderful, especially for your listeners who have no interest in this woo-woo stuff. It's practical. Here's a physicist talking about your intuition, your imagination, and he provides you this park dynamic where you go in consciousness in a meditation into this park and you have your own experiences.
Sure. So let's say you and I, right? Like you're in LA, I'm in Baltimore, and we go to Tom's Park, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I'm using my imagination to go there and interact there with his characters and the storyline that he's laid out in that book, and you do the same thing, right? Do you think we'll have like an interactive experience with your consciousness and my consciousness?
Well, if we intention it, it's very possible that we do. Just to let you know, every Saturday, for the most part, at 2:00 Central Time, Tom's MBT people, Donna Aveni and Keith Warner, facilitate what we call a global healing dynamic. So instead of talking to dead people or past loved ones or anything like that, what you're doing is you're going in, and your consciousness is basically with a whole group of people. And we have a list of people that we want to have healing happen with. And so the LCS gets the list, and we have seen dramatic things happening with people during that healing. So it's not just the woo-woo stuff and even the remote viewing or any of that, making the paranormal normal. No, it's also healing. And what we do when we go into a meditation. And after the meditation, we all talk about what we've experienced. And now we've been going to Tom's Park. So someone will say, oh my God, Marla had a conversation with me about Christmas trees. And I'm like, I had written Christmas tree down on my paper during the meditation. Or one of the first things that happened when we first experienced this, it was a explorers group where Tom was teaching us this. We went into a meditation, and I saw Keith with a little hat on, those sort of like soda jerk hats. And he was behind a counter outside selling lemonade. And he gets on after we have this meditation. He said, well, I was the soda jerk, and I was standing behind this. I'm like, I got the ice cream from you. So yes, it could very well may be that we intention that and we have that experience.
I love that.
It's really amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Marla, the tool Frees.
Thanks.
What tool would you be? I would.
Well, I know I could be the velvet hammer. I know that I could be.
That's funny. I was going to say the hammer.
Velvet hammer.
Velvet hammer.
I think that I like to pry things open.
Mm.
So it might be, I might be, I don't know, the golden crowbar. I don't want to hit anybody over the head, but
that's funny. Marla, how can people find out more about you? Where can they connect?
marlafrees.com, FREES.com. That's my website. And I have specials going on right now for January and February. So if anybody's interested in getting a discount on either a Zoom, where I work with family members, or two-person sessions, or phone, I like to do phone work because it keeps me focused on the information, not just looking at people. So I'm distracted by their beautiful home or how cute they are. So if they're interested, please send me a note through the contact form, fill it out, tell me that they saw me or talked to us on Trey's show, and I'll show them the discounts for January and February.
Awesome. They might be distracted with all the orbs that are in your house.
Oh
So,
my God. And also the book is still available on Amazon, American Psychic, and it's an Audible as well. 9 hours.
do you read it? Do you read
Oh
it?
yeah. 9 hours of me telling you things.
That's fun. I like that. You read that. That's awesome. Marla, this has been absolutely a treat. Thank you so much for taking the time again to come on the show.
Ray, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I love how you're growing in your own awareness. And I think maybe we should switch. Maybe I interview you the next time.
I love that.
Okay.